I suddenly felt overwhelmingly depressed and vulnerable, and incapable of ever attaining anything like Lenson's record. As always, I found the war almost totally paralyzing, probably because of my soft French blood, which Lenson despised so much. I was really almost as bad as Lindbergh. He wasn't a true German either, but came from somewhere near Lake Constance, one of Lenson's typical black hairs. A joyous group had begun to sing Marienka, and general drunken revelry took over again. This time, though, I stayed on the sidelines, sunk in thought. All my pride I had felt when I had sworn my oath at Camp F, all my joy in feeling that at last I was the equal of my companions for whom I felt an unquestioning respect, all the struggles and miseries undertaken and enduring with the burning faith of a true believer, all of these had been once again cast into doubt by Lenson's drunken outburst. I had always sensed a certain scorn on his part. However, once in Poland he had come to my defense, and I had jumped to the conclusion that he held nothing against me on account of my origins. Now I knew the truth. Despite all my efforts and all the sufferings we had been through together, my comrades rejected me. Would they ever think me worthy of bearing German arms? Inwardly, I cursed my parents for having brought me into the world at their particular crossroads. I felt angry and sad and incredibly alone. I knew that I could count on Hals and Fener and maybe a few others, but even they had started drinking and singing again, beside their blood brothers. I would never again be able to sing with a light, casual spirit those German songs I enjoyed so much, and someday, maybe very soon, I might die in a position not much better than that of an adoring black slave at his master's side. This vision of things was unbearable, and increased the nausea brought on by alcohol. I went outside to vomit and took a few breaths of icy air. My drunkenness prevented any further thought, and when I returned to the hut, I collapsed onto a heap of packs to scratch the lice biting me under my belt. The next morning, the Russian front began to move again. First, they sent over a few rounds of artillery. They had been keeping us in a state of expectation for several days now, undoubtedly preparing a definitive offensive with the slowness characteristic of their organization. During the day, we were reinforced by an artillery column, which meant digging new trenches, and blistered hands for all of us. All along the front, our troops were ordered to break up the Russian positions. That afternoon, we pounded the enemy with our big guns. They remained obstinately quiet. As soon as it was dark, certain sections loaded with ammunition left our trenches and advanced across the snowy grounds. We had resumed our push to the east. Scheisse! In a state of considerable apprehension, these groups fell on a motorized Soviet regiment whose massive vehicles seemed immobilized for eternity. The night's stillness was broken by the sounds of our FMs and grenades, the cries of the Russians, surprised by this sudden, unexpected display of aggressiveness, and the roar of incendiary bombs, which must have consumed a costly quantity of materiel. Then our men made a half-turn before the Russians were able to muster any organized reaction and ran back to our trenches, bathed in transitory glory. We had, in fact, aroused the anger of the Russians, who decided to retaliate as soon as it was light. As at Belgorod, the whole horizon burst into flame, with the sudden, total involvement of the opening bars of the Wagner opera. Our frantic dash to our positions assumed a tragic quality, as the rain of fire was so dense that a quarter of our men fell before they reached the line. Then we relived scenes and experiences very like what we'd known before. The sight of comrades screaming and writhing through final moments of agony had become no more bearable with familiarity. And I, despite my longing to live or die a worthy hero of the Wehrmacht, was no less of an animal stiff with uncontrollable terror. Fortunately for us, the Luftwaffe, which we could no longer rely, made an unexpected appearance and somewhat reduced the force of the Russian blow. But the next day this intervention was answered in kind, and Russian planes did what they could to knock out our artillery. As a result, our artillery was withdrawn during the night, leaving us to do the honors unsupported. We held our positions for 4 more terrible days, in spite of continuous infantry attacks supported by armor. Whenever possible, we buried our dead in the holes where they fell. 83 names were scratched off the company list. Among them, Olin Schein, who had recovered from a serious wound at Belgrade to receive his coup de grace here on the west bank of the Dnieper, where tranquility was to have been assured. The Russians had finally regrouped for their supreme effort and were delaying only to complete last-minute preparations. Their artillery, which seemed to be growing stronger by the hour, pounded our positions in the countryside for a long way back. The veteran had just been wounded and was waiting, along with some 100 other men, for evacuation to a hospital, or at least to a quieter zone in the rear. A brusque sergeant had taken Wiener's place, and I continued to feed ammunition into the Spandau, operated by someone considerably less expert than my friend. The night which followed was so horrible that I retain only a confused and fragmented memory of it. Fresh supplies of ammunition were often slung into a length of canvas and carried across the trenches by 2 or 4 fellows. The night of which I speak was, of course, totaled by 5 in the evening. Time in Russia is like that. In the summer, there's almost no night, and in winter, no day. We had just withstood 2 or 3 major assaults. From the screams of anguish to our left, we concluded that a great many of our men had been killed. We had emptied 5 magazines and were warming our fingers on the hot metal of the machine gun. Our 6th and last magazine had been attached, and we were anxiously waiting for fresh supplies. The night was continuously lit by the explosion of thousands of Russian shells, which made movement extremely difficult. Our trenches, which in any case were not deep enough, extended only to certain positions. The others had to be reached by leaps and bounds, alternating with plunges in the ground and writhing on our stomachs across dozens of yards of snow mixed with chunks of frozen earth. From time to time, we could see 4 figures move toward us, jumping from crater to crater, carrying shells for a 50mm mortar and magazines for the Spandau. They were still about 40 yards away when their shadowy mess was surrounded by a flash of white light. We never heard any cries. A few minutes later, I was sent out to crawl to the point of impact. The sergeant ordered me to bring back at least 2 magazines. I had just arrived at my destination when I heard the Russian assault cry, followed by a shower of grenades and mortar shells. The ground shook beneath me in a manner which defied all prediction. I felt like a pea inside a ferociously beaten drum. I was lying flat on the ground among the bodies of comrades killed only minutes before, unable to see any of the supplies I had been sent to fetch. Then I heard the sound of a tank. The darkness all around me was broken by streaks of light and large pink and yellow explosions. In a momentary beam from some headlight, I could see a small sign marked S157. I opened my mouth wide as prescribed because I could hardly breathe, and lay where I was, frantically groping for something to hang on to in that diabolical setting, where her horizontal and vertical alternated to the rhythm of the lights which slashed the darkness. I thought that I could recognize through the uproar the crackle of the weapon I had operated with Wiener and had left only a moment before, and felt that my sanity must be close to collapse. I could see no escape from my situation, and lay glued to the ground with my head down, like a trussed animal, waiting for the butcher's axe. 100 yards to my left, the pack, with its barrel marked for 11 kills, was fleeing into the stripped darkness with its ammunition and gun crew. I heard the terrifying roar of a tank rising above the general tumult, and a headlight waved and leaped through the undulating darkness. It had obviously driven through our defenses and was now passing within 20 yards of where I lay. I suddenly saw it burst into flame, and despite the intense cold, a wave of hot air almost asphyxiated me. Half unconscious, I could hear the trample of running feet all around me, And despite the noise of guns and explosions, cries which sounded more like curses than anything else, and were certainly neither French nor German. I thought I could distinguish 2 or 3 pairs of boots thumping past me. Everything happened so quickly at the moment that I am no longer sure, in fact, what I did see. I could still hear the sound of a machine gun, and then there were hundreds of shouting voices. The tank exploded a second time, showering steel fragments all around me. Some of our soldiers must still have been firing.